Chartrand, who serves as recruitment director there. So I'm going to share some information about Michigan Lutheran Seminary. I'm glad to be joined by our Sunday school families too, as you get to hear about that school not too far away from here in St. Paul's, Michigan Lutheran Seminary. So, give your attention to Pastor Ross Chartrand.
Thanks, Pastor. Morning, everyone. This is going to be an interesting presentation. Usually I talk to people that don't really have any clue what Michigan Lutheran Seminary is or does or where it's located. And this is the exact opposite. Right in your backyard, I think it's maybe 8 blocks. I haven't counted recently, but obviously not very far down the road. Many of you are familiar with it, having graduated from there or still in connection there, whether you're on the faculty. I see several of those, or you have students that will soon be there, or whether you have grandkids there perhaps. So this is going to be interesting. I don't know if I'm going to tell you anything new, so I'm going to pull a flipped classroom a little bit. I'll give part of my presentation which focuses more on ministerial education as a whole and the wonderful system that God has blessed our church with. But then I'll kind of open it up to you a little bit for more of a question and answer sort of thing as well. Perhaps you know most of what's going on at MLS this year with the different protocols we've had to do, but if you're curious about anything like that, I'd be happy to fill you in. First of all, I know many of you fairly well already, but for those of you who don't, I'm in my 4th year out of Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary, graduated in 2017. I didn't know that I wanted to be a pastor, though, until about 2016. I graduated from Luther Prep, that's MLS's sister high school, one of the 2 prep schools that our synod has. And I went there because my oldest brother was going to be a senior when I was a freshman, and it sounded good to have a safety net, just in case I didn't know what the ropes were, he could show them to me. If I had a bout of homesickness, I at least had a family member there. So I went to Luther Prep because my brother was going to be there. I went to our College of Ministry, Martin Luther College, because a majority of my friends were going there, and I didn't feel like making new ones. I went to the seminary because I hadn't really figured, there hadn't been any big speed bumps that told me, no, you shouldn't be doing this. I don't know if that's the right motivation, to be honest. It was kind of just the path of least resistance. And I liked what I was doing. There wasn't anything wrong with that, I suppose. But I didn't really know that I wanted to be a pastor until I went vicaring out in a congregation in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And it wasn't because it was some exotic locale or anything like that, but that's where I started to see that really ministry in our church body does have a lot of training that goes along with it, but the most important thing is a love for God's people and a love for God's word. And my supervising pastor was very clear about that, both verbally and non-verbally, and that's when I got to see it actually happen in action. Going away to school for all those years, I was kind of separated from my church home in Manassas, Virginia for most of my high school and college years, because I was only there for breaks and summer vacation. So I was a little bit involved with the church there, but not a whole lot. And then being away at school, you went to church on Sundays, maybe went to Bible class, maybe not. I wasn't as involved. So finally having a church home, having someone who was modeling ministry so well is what drove me to continue for that last year and then to get assigned to MLS. And I can tell you, it's kind of funny to look back now and realize it was foolish to think that God didn't have a plan for me. And now, even just 4 years in, it's been an awesome ride. I was not expecting to come to Michigan Lutheran Seminary, but I'm incredibly blessed that that's where God decided to put me, and that's where He's kept me for the last couple years as well. I've got kind of a unique job as a member of the faculty because I don't really teach. I taught as a member of the dorm staff my first 2 years. I taught Latin 2 to sophomores and juniors, and PE to freshmen. Not exactly what I thought I was going to school for, but it works out because I'm kind of a language nerd, and PE is just recess for high schoolers, so it works out all right. But I am still technically called a member of the faculty, even though I haven't taught for the last 2 years now. My main job is to travel, whether it's with the choir when they go on tour or occasionally out on their Sundays, but also just to travel to the over 300 grade schools that we have throughout our synod. An interesting tidbit is my older brother, who was a senior, 3 years older than I was, he is also a recruitment director at Luther Prep. So you have 2 brothers working at sister high schools. Could go very well, could go very poorly. Either way, the Wells can pin it on the Chartrand family if things go in the bag pretty quick here. It also kind of sounds like the start of a mafia story a little bit too, that there's one family in control of that. But it is a fun thing. He's been at it he's in his 5th year in that position. So it's nice to not only have an older brother in the ministry, but also someone who is very familiar with the job and what to do. And our one unspoken rule, besides no touching of the hair or face when we get into fist fights, that would be don't cross state lines. So I don't go into Wisconsin, he doesn't go into Michigan, but otherwise it's kind of a free-for-all. And really, I feel bad for him because not only does he have a little bit more ground to cover as far as number of grade schools, but he also has lots of area Lutheran high schools, and apparently things get kind of weird when you're encroaching on federations and territories, and he says it is, you have to tread lightly a little bit. So in Michigan, I have to tread lightly down in the southwest side of the state with Michigan Lutheran High School and a little bit down in the Detroit area. The weird thing is, as I talk to those grade schools, and you can kind of see they've got their allegiances already built up, is you have to remind them that we're all on the same side. And that's a fun thing I remember from high school, too, going to Luther Prep, and the MLS kids would come through on their way to New Ulm, to the college. And there was this weird tension on campus, like we were somehow rivals. And then we got to MLC, and it turns out the guys that I had the most in common with were the MLS kids, because we had very similar experiences, whether it was in the dorms or just at a prep school. And so I don't know why we thought that there was some sort of rivalry. Really, the teams don't even play each other. I don't think they even have a scrimmage. So there's no real reason for a rivalry. And there's not one. It just takes a little bit for the high school kids to get over the alma mater pride a little bit and realize, it's actually a wonderful, wonderful bond that we have already. And that's something that you start to feel more and more as you progress through the ministerial training system that our church has set up. You don't feel like you're working against each other, but rather that you're working with each other. That's enough about me, though. About 20 years ago, the Ford Motor Company brought in a new CEO, a guy by the name of Alan Mulally. He had currently been a top exec or one of the higher-up execs at the Boeing Company. And one of the first things Alan did is he started visiting different areas of Michigan and visiting different branches of the company and sitting down with some of the employees, kind of a town hall sort of feel. And the most frequent question he was asked by these Ford employees is, what qualifies you to run a car company? He was a Boeing guy. He was an airplane expert. And so in response to that question, Alan would generally ask them two of his own. He would ask, how many parts are there in an F-150? And the Ford workers looked around at each other, and they said it's about 20,000 or so. And then he'd ask them a second question. How many parts are there in a 747? And the answer to that one, the auto workers didn't know, but it ends up being about 6 million. So about 300 F-150s to equal the same number of parts in one 747. And when I first read that story, I thought that Alan was kind of mean, maybe trying to put these workers in their place, show them who the head honcho was. But as I read more about Alan, I realized he's quite a visionary, and one of his main strengths is an ability to expand people's scope, their viewpoint. And what he was trying to do with those questions wasn't put the Ford workers in their place or assert his dominance as the new CEO. His main goal was to broaden their scope, to show them in a very kind of vivid way that it really doesn't matter how many parts there are in a machine. What matters is that all the parts are working together. And then he offered to expand that even more and say, don't even worry about a product that a company makes. Think about the company itself. It doesn't matter how big or how small a business is. What matters is that all the parts, all the employees, all the support staff, all the heads of the company are working together. And that's important in church, too, both at a congregational level and at a synodical level. And it's also important when we think about Christian education, that we have a system that our students can go through from the time they can barely even walk all the way up through a seminary graduate if they're in the right part of the country, or that they're able to make those sacrifices and those choices as a family. And it really is an amazing system that God has given our church body. I don't know how many early childhood centers there are now, because more and more, dozens each year, keep popping up. I do know that there's over 300 grade schools throughout the country. It's the third largest private education system or Christian education system, even though the Wells is far from being even the third largest denomination of Christianity. Besides those over 300 grade schools, there's 25 area Lutheran high schools. And you could say, yeah, sure, many of them are in the upper Midwest. That's where our church is based, but there's also some down in Arizona and in California. There are ones popping up now down in Florida as well, and Texas. But within this larger system of Christian education that God has blessed us with and that has worked so well to bring children up, there's a smaller specialized system, and that's what MLS is blessed to be a part of a 4-school system whose sole purpose is to encourage and then to train future pastors, teachers, and staff ministers for the church. It's a wonderful blessing that God has given us a school just in your backyard. And it's awesome that we see so many kids from St. Paul's that go there. Sam, I'm going to call you out a little bit. Do you know how many of the 8th graders from St. Paul's are coming to MLS next year?
7, 8, or 9.
Out of?
14.
There you go. I mean, that's a great number. I mean, there's maybe a couple over here that I'm seeing. Yeah. Yeah, it's an awesome thing that we're able to work so closely with St. Paul's and that we're able to have days like today where we have our kids who have their God-given gifts and abilities, but they share that with the church even as 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. That is something I do tend to forget, especially when you see the choir up here and you listen to them, you hear their voices, that they are just teenagers still. I realize it's maybe not the same as a professional choir, but the fact that they have those gifts from God, those beautiful voices, those instruments that they're able to play, and the fact that they're still 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. And they have so much more time in their lives to grow in their skills, but then also grow in their opportunities to share those skills with others to the glory of God. It's an amazing thing that we have, and that's one of the other things that I get to do with my job as I travel around, is I get to thank people like you for your support of Michigan Lutheran Seminary and your support of Christian education as a whole. Not everyone does that. Not everyone sees the value of having a Christ-centered curriculum as part of their ministry. But you do. And without congregations like St. Paul's, without congregations throughout our synod, MLS would not exist. Through your mission offerings, you help keep our lights on, our faculty paid, our students coming in. And then, as a way to say thank you to you, our whole purpose is that we are encouraging kids to become pastors and teachers so that at churches like St. Paul's, you can receive graduates like Pastor Bilo and Pastor Naumann too. And that at schools, you can have people coming from Martin Luther College that are not only well qualified to teach, but are firmly rooted in God's word, and that they want to show the kids that word, to help them to grow in their faith. So that's the main part of our journey, or not our journey, our mission at MLS is to encourage those high schoolers to think about becoming pastors and teachers. They certainly don't have to have their minds made up. I know I didn't, not for many years. But we want them to start considering it. And so what we try to do is we try to build, if you will, if you consider MLS a machine, we try to build well-rounded, faithful Christians. And we do that by giving them as many opportunities as possible to expand their gifts and to grow in those gifts as well. That's why we have not just the concert choir, but 5 choirs at school, as well as a band program and piano and organ instructors as well, so they can expand their musical talents and abilities and then be able to share them with others at whatever church they end up serving at or being a member of. It goes beyond just music, though. As you look at the kids up here, as you looked at them in first service, recognize that they are not just music junkies. They're also not just meatheads. They're also not just drama folks either. In fact, as you look up here, you'll see football players, actually right now, wrestlers, basketball players, student council members, student ambassadors. Let's see, what else am I missing? A lot. I'm probably missing a lot of things up there. That's one of the joys that our kids do is they have all these opportunities and they've built this culture as a student body to use those opportunities. I know a lot of kids that are 3-sport athletes. They're in at least one of the choirs. They're part of the play productions, and then they're in 2 or 3 groups beyond that. I don't know how they did it, how they continue to do it. They are busy from the time they get up until the time they go to sleep, but I do know that they are loving every minute of it. So, keep that in mind as you look at the choir. You're still looking at teenagers who are figuring life out, but have figured it out enough that they know that they have a love for Jesus that they want to share with other people, and that they have gifts that have been given to them by God that they want to hone and grow in, so that one day they can use those gifts to serve a church potentially. Now, on a side note, I have heard that there are people that are not fully supportive of the prep school system. They don't see the value in it. They see the college, and they see that teachers come immediately from the college. They see the big seminary in Mequon. But as far as the prep schools go, they say maybe you could take it or leave it a little bit. However, statistically speaking, that would not be a wise idea. There are 56 freshmen at MLC this year in the pastor track. 36 of them come from the 2 prep schools. 13 from MLS, 26 from Luther Prep. That's not to say anything bad about area Lutheran high schools in the slightest, but it is to say that the prep school system, because of that very specific purpose and the specific encouragement that our kids get and have through 4 years of high school, it does work. God works through it. While we're talking about encouraging students to think about the ministry, I will say this too. It's not a lightning bolt sort of thing. In fact, I think if you speak to most of the pastors and teachers in our synod, very few of them will say, I had a lightning bolt moment where God said, boom, I want you to be a pastor. Generally what happens is over the course of years and years and years, God uses these small encouragements from congregation members, from parents and grandparents, from siblings even, from friends, to keep them thinking, to keep them on the road to the ministry. It's a snowball effect of encouragement. And so as you look at the students up here today, look also at the students that are next to you in the pews or that are down the road in the school, and continue to encourage them. What may seem like kind of a small throwaway comment to you, like, hey, Johnny, you did a great job at the Christmas Eve service, your recitation was awesome. They're going to remember that. Maybe not the exact words that you use, but they're going to remember that someone took the time out of their day to reach out to them and say, hey, you have these gifts and abilities that God has given you, and you can use them in many different ways, but especially maybe as a pastor or a teacher. So continue to encourage the young kids in your congregation, in your school as well, because that snowball does get bigger and bigger as the kids get older and older. All right. Anyone learned anything new yet? Okay, that's fine. I will open it up to some questions if you have, whether it's about MLS, about, I don't know if you want to know more about me, but there may not be many questions either, and that's all right. Yes? Yes, the enrollment at Luther Prep is just about 400.
So twice as large as that.
Yes.
And what about the male-female mix?
At Luther Prep or at MLS?
Yeah, well, MLS is pretty equal.
Yes, I believe it's 51% girls right now at MLS.
Yeah.
I think it's very similar at Prep, except 51% boys, but they're pretty much split down the middle.
So you talked about what was going on in pastoral ministry
Yes.
at MLC. And that was, we've got 56 students up there from the 2
36 students, yes, 56 from anywhere.
Do we have a larger percentage of girls going on for teaching?
That's a great question. I haven't seen that metric. I have access to it, I just didn't look at it. Yep, it's the average of each graduating class going from one of the 2 prep schools to Martin Luther College is about 50%. We've been about 45 to 50 for the last 6 years now, and Luther Prep is right about the same, which is awesome. However, it also means that 50% of our graduates do something else with their lives too, which is equally awesome. That's one of the tough things about a prep school is you want to have a specific focus on the ministry, but also recognize that half of your students are going to go into different vocations and different careers, and we want to make sure that we're not doing them a disservice and making sure that they're prepared, whether it's academically or with social skills, life skills, things like that. It's a fun challenge, though. And actually what ends up happening is most of them, they all learn the same skills, at least academically and whatnot, and social skills, and really being a pastor or teacher isn't that much different from any other profession. Different schooling, different training, obviously, but to have the same Christian love for people is going to serve you well, no matter what your vocation or calling is. And applying yourself, using the gifts that God has given you, of course, that's something we want our pastors and teachers to have, but it's also something that we want everyone, all Christians, to show. Yeah. I am kind of a statistics guy, so you made me start thinking. One of the coolest things that I've noticed in my time at MLS, there's two things. I don't know the exact percentage for one, but I do know for the other. The first thing is this. A majority of our grade schools in the mid-Michigan area send about 70 to 90% of their 8th graders to MLS. So I know we don't technically have a federation because we are a synodical school, but we kind of low-key have a federation everywhere from Midland, Bay City, Saginaw, down into mid-Michigan. A number of schools, I believe Good Shepherd down in Burton, outside of Flint, they almost have more kids at MLS than in their grade school at this point. I think it's 17 at MLS, 19 at Good Shepherd. That's from the congregation and those small little encouragements. A lot of it also goes, you can give credit to the pastors and the teachers there, but it's a congregational effort that they are encouraging it and making this almost the norm for where kids go to high school. I know Pastor Bilo mentioned that he doesn't even mention any other schools in confirmation. He just says, when you go to MLS, this will be handy, or something like that. So that's all part of this, is normalizing that a prep school is an excellent place for your children to be. So that's the stat that I don't know exactly, somewhere in between about 70 to 90%. The stat that I do know is that 80% of students at MLS come from non-called worker families. That is a massive number, where dad's not a pastor or a teacher, mom's not a teacher, complete lay members. So when you look at these students up here, 8 out of 10 of them are first-generation called workers, potentially. That's a great thing. That's an awesome thing. And again, that's part of what you do as a church that supports MLS, is you encourage all kids, not just the Naumanns, not just the Belos. I mean, you got to wait a few years for them, but that you're encouraging all of your kids and all of your families to consider MLS as an option. And that's something that I can't do. I make sure to tell all the teachers and parents that I meet with, maybe I can get out to their school twice a year, 3 times a year max. That's not enough. You guys do way more than I ever can do. And that's one of the beauties of my job is yes, I get to encourage myself, but I also get to encourage encouragers, kind of one link back in the chain. So thank you for all the encouragement that you do, because without you, I can't do it. It's not physically possible. Any other questions? Yes?
The freshman class at MLC Pastoral Track, I assume is the biggest class they have there as far as pastoral track.
It's the biggest in recent years, yes.
Do you know the amount ahead of them at MLC in the different classes?
Generally, it's been in the mid to high 40s, so we're looking at about 10 more students in that freshman class. There's some natural attrition that happens throughout the course of ministry training, guys taking years off, traveling overseas, emergency calls, things like that happen all the time. And so generally what happens is by the time that class of 56 gets to their seminary graduation, they will likely be in the high 30s to low 40s. But all of the students that sort of matriculated out for gap years, things like that, will then fall into the classes behind them. So it may not be a concentrated class of 56 that goes all the way through, but it doesn't mean that they just had 15 guys just fall off the rails at some point either. They probably will just be graduating in the years past, in the years to come. Yeah. Yes?
Are you able to do any recruiting in China these days? I know they used to go there.
A little bit. President Lutzow and Professor Andrew Naumann, he's the head of the international program, they were there, it would have been 2 years ago now. However, I believe things are becoming a little bit more unstable. So I know Friends of China, the organization that is attached with the Wells, has been starting to roll people back out of the country in the past year or so. However, the fun thing about that, I spoke with someone who's on the board for Friends of China. China maybe looks like it's getting a little more closed down, but they're seeing other opportunities in different countries of Southeast Asia. I forget which ones off the top of my head, but the guy that I spoke to listed at least 4 or 5 where they're already looking into opportunities for missionaries to start working in those countries as well.
So Friends of China
Minimally.
Your friends network now?
Mm-hmm.
Because aren't they also in Indonesia? They're trying to branch out.
Yes, Friends Network. That's right. Mhm. Yes.
What's the projection for calls that will not be filled in this spring's call service? Do you know?
That's a great question. I don't. Could you rephrase it slightly?
About a year ago, I remember hearing that there was a great need for call workers, that there are many unfilled pastoral calls out there. Just wondering if we're catching up at all.
Starting to. We're kind of, how life is a sine curve in general, or a sine wave. I believe we're starting to see the uptick, at least at the college level, those bigger classes coming through. Julius, what did you have in your class Pastor Bilo, how many did you have in your class when you graduated from WLS? 26. I had 32. But with those big classes coming through, that's hopefully on the uptick. The issue is, well, not an issue, but the issue is we have many pastors that are retiring. That's just naturally there's a bigger generation of called workers. When you had guys graduating in the 60s and 70s with 60 guys in their class, and now you have about half that on average. Like I said, though, we are on the upswing. What's going to happen, though, is it'll take a few years for them to matriculate through the system. So we have 56 freshmen at MLC this year, excellent, but they won't be out until 2028, 2029. So it's a waiting game kind of at this point. Pastor Naumann, you may have more accurate numbers than I do, but are we still hovering somewhere in between 100 and 110 pastoral vacancies synod-wide? Still about 100, which ends up being about 1 in 12 churches. However, I have heard that there is a healthy number of vacancies too. It's sort of a balancing game, because if you don't have any vacancies, the calling bodies don't really need to pass people around at all, and so you can become stale in your ministries. But on the other side of that, if there's too many vacancies, well, that obviously is an issue all of its own. So from what I've been told, we're on the higher end of having too many, but it's still considered a healthy amount. Obviously, we would love it if we had all of our vacancies filled. That would be a great thing. But we're not in the danger zone yet, I would say. So yes, there is still a need, especially on the pastor side of things. I'm not sure exactly what the teacher vacancy count would be. That's such a fluid situation, depending on what the school itself is doing, whether it's combining classrooms or still calling. So I don't have an exact number on that, but the harvest is always going to be plentiful, and the workers are always going to be too few. Thankfully, God tells us exactly what we do about that. As we ask the Lord of the harvest, we pray to God that he would continue to send out workers into those fields, that he would continue to send kids to training schools like Michigan Lutheran Seminary and the rest of our synodical ministerial training schools. And we can be confident God knows what he's doing way better than we do. We have a plan, but sometimes God laughs at our plans or doesn't end run around it, and he's got his own beautiful thing set up. Yes? There are at least 4 at MLC right now. I don't know if you remember Peter Shee or Jerry Yang. There's at least 2 more. There are several that go to Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato as well, so not necessarily into the ministry, but they're still going to a Lutheran college. And then at MLS right now, I believe we have 16. 16, yep, with more coming next year, because we had 3 Chinese students that were not able to make it because of travel restrictions, so they'll be transferring in next year, along with 2 German students as well, along with kind of our normal international fields coming in as well. So about 16 ends up being about 10% of the student body comes from an international mission field, which is a really fun thing. I otherwise would have 0 contact with anyone from a foreign culture. And our kids probably wouldn't either, but they have this experience now, and they have friends from literally all over the world. Anyone else? Yeah.
What are some of your answers to money questions when parents are worried about paying for school?
Oh, sure. Because we're a synodical school, we have the support of 1,200 plus congregations. So the actual cost of MLS is much higher than what you'll see on any literature. It's in between a half and 2/3 of the full cost to educate a student at MLS. Beyond that, we also have a sizable financial aid program. You have to apply for it. It's need-based, but it's over $300,000 each year is budgeted out to help families. About 50% of families who apply receive some sort of financial aid, anywhere from, I believe it's $500 to $3,500. That ends up being in between a quarter and a third of the total cost of tuition, room and board, or if it's just tuition, that could be up to half of the tuition. The other tough thing, though, is we would love to have as much money as possible. Our goal is to make sure that money is never an obstacle for families to be sending their kids to MLS. But there's also a little bit of a two-way street action there, too. You have to value Christian education to the point where you are willing to make these sacrifices to ensure that your students are growing up in God's Word on a daily basis, that they're surrounded by like-minded Christian young men and women. So it's a little bit on families to have to make the sacrifices like anything else in life, but also we do our best to help them out as much as possible. As a case study, there are 4 freshmen who are quadruplets this year. That's a lot of money. Family moved from Flint up to Saginaw so that they wouldn't have to pay room and board for quadruplets, but it's still 4 kids at once. And we're able to help them out, whether it's through our financial aid program or through special donors that recognize this is a great thing, that these kids want to be at MLS, that this family wants them to be at MLS, and they're willing to do anything to make that a reality. So just a small case study to show you that when you put your mind to it, you can do anything when it comes to money. Thanks. Anything else? Check where we're at for time. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the choir, that they were able to edify your worship service here this morning. If you're sticking around for second service, enjoy. It's always a fun time. We'll be heading out on tour right after Easter, weekend after Easter, down to Ohio. That's been one of the rough parts with COVID, is we had this great grand swan song of a tour for Professor Praber, going out all the way to the Front Range of Colorado, but with different protocols that are happening and people being a little bit skittish about hosting random kids from a high school in Michigan. Maybe as expected, we decided to cancel that tour, perhaps do it a different year. So we'll be in Ohio, Columbus, and Centerville, and up towards the Monroe area over a quick four-day tour. There you have it. Thanks very much for your time and your questions. If you have any further questions about MLS, you can walk 8 blocks about that way, and we'll be there. Thank you.